I'm picking my way through stones I brought from home, hand-picked, heavy bag. Here's a stone I asked a student of mine to paint to look like the Israeli flag. Imagine Benny Begin, who was once called a crazy old man for changing his mind about Israeli politics. Imagine Benny picking this stone out of the rubble 2,600 years after the destruction of the first temple. He deciphers the ancient Hebrew message on it, and with a tear in his eye, he's amazed that he can smell the harvest. Benny's a geologist as well as a politician, so he feels linked physically, intimately to his people, to the history, to the continuity of the Israel story, the Jewish story. From holding a rock. Jews are famous for holding stone. Think Moses and the Ten Commandments. Think David, Goliath slayer. Some people today say Israel is more of a Goliath than a David. Huh. Benny lost a son in a war. His other son became a peace activist. Here's another stone. I asked that same student to paint to represent the Palestinian flag. This design, these colors stir up a lot of feelings in people, in Israelis, in Jews, in Palestinians, just as the Israeli flag does. Imagine the Palestinian wife and mother who picks this stone out of the rubble of her home in Gaza after an Israeli bomb has destroyed it. She turns to the camera, dry-eyed, and explains what happened to her son, to her husband. And she prays to Allah for mercy. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Here's a third stone, given to my father in the last stages of a long, terrible illness. God is my rock. I don't know that he was such a believer, but he led the long version of Shabbat prayers every Friday night, and he could be counted on to make a minyan and a pretty good noodle kugel. It's crazy to me, but I'm now 16 years older than he was on Yom Kippur 1973. How did that happen? Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, as Dad would say, that well-attended, highest of high holidays when Jews pray to God that will be inscribed in the book of life for another year. We plead our case physically. Some of us prostrate ourselves in front of the Torah. We sit down, we stand up continually. We beat our hearts as one, confessing our sins, holy book in hand. And it's heavy. 24 hours of, if you stay in the room and tough out the fast, exquisite communal vulnerability. 1973, October, Yom Kippur. Golda Meir is Prime Minister of Israel during the Yom Kippur War. William Gibson wrote a play about it called Golda's Balcony. It's a one-woman show. I played her for the first time in 2013 at the old courthouse in Bristol, Rhode Island. Beautiful space, perfect for Golda. She's on trial for almost pushing the button that would have started a nuclear war to save Israel, which was being attacked by a coalition of Arab nations backed by Russia. Across the street from the courthouse was a nice restaurant in a hotel where my mother stayed when she came to see the show. And on our way to dinner one night, we saw, well, I saw, she was mostly blind by then, so I described it to her. Mom, we're in a passageway. On your right, there's a display case. In it are heavy black iron manacles and chains. The card says they held slaves brought from Ghana to Bristol, the north corner of the triangle trade. And there are rum barrels. That's all it says. What is it? A mini museum and exhibit for tourists? What? I don't know. That's it. If this is the hub of slave trade history in New England, they have some work to do. And she was a smart woman, tough critic. She died 7 years later. The spring George Floyd was murdered. I joined my neighborhood social justice protest. They're still there on the post office steps every Sunday, westerly, 11 to 1 p.m. I love playing iconic, complicated Golda. I love how she made herself iconic. I want to believe in the story she tells about the bloody birth of Israel. At the talkbacks after each show, audience members share bits of personal history. My husband was making his rounds as a visiting surgeon at Jerusalem's Hadassah Hospital. He witnessed a gravely ill Golda, who went regularly for her cancer treatments, refused to be seen before the other patients. She didn't pull rank or cut the line. She didn't want special treatment. I think she still felt guilty about the war. Golda was personally blamed for the loss of 2,656 Israeli soldiers. She knew their names, the dead. She knew their families. Golda, a secular Jew, not religious, trying to do the right thing, the Jewish thing, which for a Jew is an action. It's a choice. It is Jewish or it is un-Jewish. It's pikuach nefesh. To save a life overrides everything. It's tikkun olam, heal the world, fix it. Golda was a fixer. In the early days of the state, she insisted on and worked out a plan that everyone should ration food, water, petrol, because the new country was so poor and at war with the Arabs, and everyone in Israel should be treated equally. Everyone should be equally miserable. It's a very Jewish idea. She was so smart. She negotiated a way to get the children out first from the post-Holocaust displaced persons camps on Cyprus. Some of those twice rescued children would be killed in future wars. They'd be in their 20s for the 67 Six-Day War, in their 30s for the 73 Yom Kippur War. But Golda's dismissed by some for her supposed racism, even though she championed emerging African nations and danced with the people forming them. She's resented by some who say she looked down her nose at Sephardic Jews, at Mizrahi Jews, non-Eastern European. Golda was Ashkenazi from Ukraine originally. What she would say about the horrors still happening there. She'd say, the moment that Russian bombing started, she would have said, "Get the children out, Jewish or not, an Israeli kindertransport." Or might she have hesitated because of Ukrainian collusion at Babi Yar? And Golda is scorned for her claim that there is no such thing as a Palestinian people. She justifies it in the play by saying, when they were shooting at us from Gaza, they were Egyptians. When shooting at us from the West Bank, they were Jordanians. When shooting at us from Golan, they were Syrians. Ms. Laub. Yes? What are you doing this for? You're a nice, middle-class, American, liberal Jewish woman. You're married, you're a mother, you're a teacher, you say you're an actor, whatever. Why this topic? What do you need it for? Why give yourself the aggravation? You know what I said about the Palestinian so-called refugees. 800,000 of them, 750, depends on who's counting, including children, just like the children you rescued on Cyprus in 1948 after the Holocaust. We survived. Actually, we did more than that. We thrived. How? Well, for one thing, we absorbed Jewish refugees from Arab countries. But the Arab countries won't accept their own refugees. Why must Jews be the only Christians of the world? Mrs. Meir, Golda's fine. We can be friends and disagree. Mrs. Meir, Israel thrived for many reasons, but today in Israel, the ultra-religious Jews, many of them do not love their neighbors across the settlement wall. A year ago, on the Jewish fasting day of Tisha B'Av, it's a holiday that commemorates the destruction of the temples, there was an action taken by Jewish settlers in the region of Masafir Yatta in the occupied West Bank. The settlers wanted to pray in a certain spot. They said that the synagogue, the ancient synagogue, was on that spot. It happened to be in a Palestinian village. So they sent out social media invitations, and they coordinated with Israeli security forces. And at 5 a.m. on August 7th, 2022, Palestinian families were forcibly told to stay in your homes. While the Jewish families, the settlers, took over one Palestinian family's house on that spot where there had supposedly been a synagogue. After the service, the settler children played in the Palestinian family's garden, jumping, dancing, hugging each other, taking selfies with the soldiers. The settler children saw Palestinian children shut up in their own homes, with soldiers aiming guns at them. A border police officer chased and screamed at a 3-year-old Palestinian boy, forcing him back into his own home when he tried to go out to the street. Do you think it's easy for me to do this and then go home to my mother and smile? Now I am 10 years old. I tell my mother I want to be a martyr, like all martyrs who do well for the homeland. I want liberation. Mrs. Meir, currently, all Palestinian families in the region of Masafir Yatta are being forcibly expelled from their homes. I was in Israel 9 years ago as a tourist. It happened to coincide with the Gaza war. In that single month of July, 368 Palestinian children were killed. Mrs. Meir, founding mother, is this what you and Ben Gurion, founding father, had in mind? I'll answer you like a fellow Jew with another question. What is the price for power? We were idealists. All our idealism went into the making of a state. Power. For 2,000 years, no Jew had known what it felt like to have a state. After the pogroms, after the Shoah, We needed a state. We needed a home. So do they. Palestinians mourn 1948, our Independence Day. I know their word for it. Nakba, a catastrophe. They didn't manage to destroy us. Failure is not my story. I had a part in a great success here. Where nothing was, Israel is, at the expense in blood of others. Yes, yes, we paid a price. We are still paying the price for survival in a world that doesn't care whether we live or die. Look, Mr. William Gibson, he paints a picture of me, Mama La Golda, who makes chicken soup for her soldiers. It's a nice picture, and I do make chicken soup, but then I empty it all out for keeps. Because at the bottom of the pot is blood. At the bottom of the pot is the question. What happens when idealism becomes power? It kills. To save a world you create, to protect that world you create, how many worlds are you entitled to destroy? I asked that question in October 1973 on my knees. Look, Ms. Laub, today I'm proud of the Israeli protesters. I applaud them pouring out into the streets, hundreds and thousands of them, every week for months, sometimes every day, demonstrating, protesting to preserve our Jewish brand of democracy. As long as we can fight for our rights and for our Jewish values, and yes, feel for those others in our own midst, we're alive. But Mrs. Meir, Golda, Prime Minister, as long as you see Palestinians as other, there can be no lasting peace. You, at the end of your play, you send out shalom, like a prayer, like a plea to every member of the audience. Shalom. Shalom, shalom, shalom. But why must the price for peace always be bloodshed? It doesn't have to be. God put in the grain of this earth good and evil, like two ends of a single stick or two sides of a stone. So nobody picks up one without the other. Why? Sticks and stones, Ms. Lau. People can do one thing or the other with them.
Woo! Thank you, Sandra Laub, and another round of applause.